Imagine a world where your country cannot pay its debts, governments collapse, and currencies lose value.
It seems like almost everything is more expensive these days. Just look at the price of gas per gallon. The national average topping $3.39 this week, according to
And
AAA.
economies, they come to a complete halt. If this sounds like fiction to you, it's not. It's happening right now. So for instance, in the US, the current debt is approximately $36 trillion, and it's increasing at around $196 billion each day. So in this video, myself and my AI assistant Tiara will break down how Bitcoin might be the unexpected hero in this crisis, with insights from real-world examples and one country's very bold experiment. And stick with me here because I'm also going to be exposing the biggest misconception about Bitcoin's ability to solve the global financial crisis, which is crucial to understand before arguing, for or against the idea. All right, so let's dive into the Bitcoin proposition here. So as we've seen, the US national debt is a massive problem that really needs innovative solutions. And this is where Bitcoin enters the picture. So some economists and policymakers, including former government officials, by the way, they have started to consider Bitcoin as a potential tool to address the debt crisis. But how exactly could a decentralized digital currency help with such a monumental issue? Well, my AI assistant Tiara, she can explain that a little bit.
The idea revolves around two main concepts. One, using Bitcoin-backed stablecoins to purchase U.S. debt. 2, holding Bitcoin as a long-term store of value for the government.
All right, so let's break down the first point here. So did you know that dollar-backed stablecoins like USDT and USDC collectively hold over $95 billion in US Treasury bills? That's a significant amount, and it's growing. So these stablecoins, they could potentially become major purchasers of US debt, stepping in where traditional buyers like China have kind of stepped back. As for the second point, some propose that the US government could hold Bitcoin as a long-term store of value. So the theory is that as Bitcoin appreciates over time, it could be used to offset or even reduce the national debt.
Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds pretty radical, right? Well, you're not wrong.
Like Tiara just hinted at, this proposition, it comes with its fair share of challenges and limitations. But before we get into those, let's take a closer look at a real-world example that so far has actually worked out pretty well. So here's Tiara for more about El Salvador's Bitcoin experiment that they're doing.
In September 2021, El Salvador made history by becoming the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender.
So this bold move was spearheaded by the president of El Salvador, and it was aimed at boosting financial inclusion, attracting foreign investment, and stimulating economic development. But how has that experiment played out so far? Well, it's pretty interesting. So El Salvador's government, they took several steps to encourage Bitcoin adoption, right? So they introduced the Chivo wallet, which is a digital app for Bitcoin transactions. Citizens who signed up for that wallet, they received a $30 Bitcoin incentive. Businesses were required to accept Bitcoin as payment, and the results have kind of been mixed, right? So while some businesses like a small coffee shop in San Salvador, they report that 5 to 10% of their sales are now in Bitcoin, overall adoption has been slower than expected. So only about 1% of everything being processed, they were actually transferred using cryptocurrencies in the first half of 2023. But here's where it gets interesting. So despite the challenges, El Salvador has seen some unexpected benefits. So tourism, for instance, has reportedly increased by 95% since the Bitcoin law was implemented. And in addition to that, citizens, more of them had Bitcoin Lightning wallets than traditional bank accounts. But that's not all. So Tiara, how many Bitcoin does the El Salvador government currently hold?
As of November 2024, the government holds 5,942 Bitcoins, valued at approximately $554 million.
So this substantial holding, thank you Tiara by the way, represents 1.6 of the nation's GDP, underscoring the government's belief in Bitcoin's potential as a reserve asset. However, the experiment, it hasn't been without its critics, right? So many economists and international organizations, including the IMF, have warned about the potential risks to El Salvador and their economic stability. Now you might be thinking, sure, El Salvador, they were, able to take the plunge, but could this really work for an economic superpower like the US? Well, prepare to be surprised because this next segment, it could really transform your view completely.
So let's break down the key points of how Bitcoin could potentially impact US debt and government holdings.
First, let's talk about stablecoins. So these are cryptocurrencies designed to maintain a stable value, often pegged to a traditional currency like the US dollar. So imagine them as digital versions of the dollars that exist, but obviously slightly different. Now here's the surprising part. So if stablecoins were a country, as of right now, they'd be the 18th largest foreign investor in US treasuries. So you can think of it this way. So it's like a new country suddenly appeared and started to buy up large amounts of US debt. Now, while it's only about 2.5% of all US treasury bills, it's enough to make economists and policymakers take notice, right? Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. So some people are suggesting that the US government itself should actually hold Bitcoin as a strategic reserve.
Hey, Ron, one thing to point out, this isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. The government already owns about 200,000 Bitcoins seized from criminal cases.
Fair point, Tiara. She's a smart one. But supporters of this idea, like Senator Cynthia Lummis, they claim that if the government held 1 million Bitcoin, it could potentially cover half of the US debt in 20 years. And that's a bold claim considering that the entire US national debt is over $36 trillion. Now, I'd personally be really curious to see just how high Bitcoin would go if the US decided to be an advocate and encourage other countries to buy it as well. So in theory, if this worked out perfectly, the US could pump up the price and get rid of much of the debt without a problem. Now, before you start imagining a world where Bitcoin solves all of our economic woes, let's pump the brakes for a moment. While the potential benefits, they do sound enticing, there is a flip side to this crypto thing that we have to explore as well.
First up, let's talk about Bitcoin's volatility. I mean, Bitcoin has gone from $200 to over $90,000 incredibly fast, and there have been many big-time dips along the way.
This is true. And now imagine if the government bought a ton of Bitcoin at its peak, only to watch it nosedive, right? So in theory, it wouldn't matter because the government would want to hold this long-term anyway. But I don't know how many people, including myself, really trust the government to make the right investment decisions. After all, they kind of got us into this problem in the first place. Shut up, Peyton. Don't even start, just shut up. Now on to the regulatory maze. So different agencies are playing by different rules, and it's all changing faster than you can really keep up. So how's a government supposed to work with that? And sure, it would make sense for them to pass regulations at the federal level, but nothing seems more difficult than that at this point. Also, here's the thing, even if we ironed out all those wrinkles, Bitcoin's just not big enough to make a dent in the national debt. So Bitcoin's peak market cap at present is only about 1.95 trillion. And that does sound like a lot, but it's really pocket change compared to the massive debts of some countries, like the US, for instance. To really make a difference, Bitcoin would really need to be worth more than pretty much everything on Earth. And maybe that's possible in the future, I don't know, but it definitely seems far-fetched right now. And let's not forget about the other fun stuff. So Bitcoin's fixed supply means that governments can't just print more when they need it. And that's kind of a big deal when you're trying to manage an entire economy. And I'm sure some would argue that, hey, that's a great thing. And I understand the sentiment, I do. But as we've all seen, printing money, it can get countries out of a bind like a pandemic. And even though inflation is still a problem currently, I'm not sure how things would have gone if we didn't print our way out of that mess. It's, feel free to comment about it. I'm sure some people argue with me on it. But at the end of the day, some of it was good. A lot of it was bad, but some of it was good in the end.
Keep in mind, if Bitcoin goes belly up, it could drag a lot of people and countries down with it. Oh, and did we mention it uses more energy than some small countries?
I can't imagine a world where countries basically cease to exist if Bitcoin has a major sell-off. It would be pretty crazy to watch, and who knows how many people would end up suffering and potentially dying from it. So while Bitcoin's got some really interesting potential, I just don't think it's quite ready to be, our financial Superman, if you will. But while the limitations are clear, the crypto world isn't standing still, right? So let's shift gears here for a second and explore some alternative ideas that might just change the game and could actually work even better than Bitcoin to help. Am I sweating?
First up, we've got this thing called real-world asset, RWA tokenization.
Now, I know this sounds like a mouthful, but stick with me here. So basically, this is about turning real stuff like real estate, art, or even intellectual property into digital tokens on a blockchain. It's like taking a slice of the real world and kind of putting it into the digital realm, if you will. Here's why that's a big deal. So it could make traditionally illiquid assets more tradable. So imagine being able to buy a fraction of a fancy painting or a piece of prime real estate, right? It might open up investment opportunities to more people. And you wouldn't need to be super rich to invest in high value assets anymore. It could also make transactions faster and cheaper. There'd be no more of waiting days for paperwork to clear when you're buying a new house because it's all on the blockchain that's public record. And some experts are pretty excited about this, right? They're saying that RWA tokenization, it could be worth trillions of dollars by 2030. Now, in my opinion, aside from Bitcoin itself, you should keep an eye on companies that are first adopters of this and really revolutionize the way that we do things on a blockchain. There will be some big winners in this space, and there's going to be a lot of money to be made.
Second, let's talk about making it easier to develop cryptocurrency projects in the US.
Some folks argue that if we loosen up the rules a bit, it could give the economy a nice boost. So here's the thinking. So it could attract more tech talent and investment to the US, which might lead to more innovation in financial services. It could create new jobs in tech and finance sectors, but of course, there are concerns about consumer protection and financial stability. So it's a classic case of trying to balance, innovation with safety. And as of now, President Trump is going to be entering office in January of 2025, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens from a regulation standpoint, as he's been very vocally opposed to them and vows to reduce the bureaucracy with the help of Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. That all said, obviously you've watched this video through, and you may still not be convinced that Bitcoin is the answer. Well, I do have something else that you might find interesting. And it's this video right over here, which compares gold versus Bitcoin. And you might be surprised by what AI recommends. Now, if that doesn't sound like the right video for you, you can go ahead and check this one out right here, which YouTube recommends, and hopefully you like it because I don't even know what it is. But before you click either of them, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel to unlock financial success one AI chat at a time. Thanks so much for watching.